Hey guys, it's Boxing Lowdown here, and listen, I'm delighted to be joined by Ewan from Simbox Boxing. How you doing, bro?
All good, mate. All good. Excited for this one.
Yeah, man, I've been trying to get you on for this one because, as you guys know, if you follow my Instagram page or you follow my Twitter, I do these fantasy fights every Monday. I call them Mythical Mondays, and it gets some good responses on there. We get some comments, and Ewan, he's a guy who knows his boxing history. He's a student of the sport, I'd like to say. And I thought it'd be great to do a video just summarizing some of the fights that I've done in the past and looking over some fantasy fights. And then maybe we can make this like a regular thing, maybe like a fortnightly thing, maybe, or a monthly thing. I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. But I'm going to do some fights today. I've got 5 in my mind, and I've got Ewan here to break them down for me. And I'm going to give you my predictions as well. So, Ewan, when you're ready, we'll just jump straight into it, man.
Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, like I say, I think nerd is probably a more accurate description than student of the game. But yeah, no, there's some great ones to break down here. You know, it's some of the more talked about ones in boxing.
Yeah, I feel it'd be a good idea to start off with some of the most talked about ones first. I don't want to dive straight into the real technical ones, from history ones that maybe not everybody would get as much as of now. So, but there's plenty of time. There's plenty of videos for that, and I'm sure over time we can dig deep into some further fantasy fights. But let's start off with some good ones for now, some more familiar ones. And the first one that I'm going to do is one that we've looked at before, and I couldn't get a prediction out of you this time, but I'm going to this time. So I'm going to get a prediction out of you for this video. And that is the fantasy fight between Tyson Fury and Mike Tyson. Now, I put this on my Instagram the other day, and yeah, there was a lot of varied comments, actually. There was quite a mix. Some people were like, nah, this is ridiculous. I've got Mike Tyson in that one. And then there were others like, nah, hold on. Fury's way too big. He's too skillful. He'd win. So before we get into predictions, just break it down. I know you gave me a stat that I wasn't aware of. So why don't you share that with the viewers as to what stat that was in terms of the size of these two heavyweights and the magnitude of this fight?
Yeah, so basically, in the history of the heavyweight division, there's been characters of all sizes, from Dwight Muhammad Qawi at 5'7" all the way up to Nikolai Valuev at 7'3". But Tyson Fury and Mike Tyson are at polar opposite ends of that spectrum. It's an 11-inch height gap, okay? So in terms of lineal title fights, there's never been a lineal heavyweight title fight with that size gap. The closest is Jess Willard, Jack Dempsey in 1919, which off the top of my head was 7 or 8 inches. And the biggest belt fight was 11 inches, which is equal. So it was for I believe, the WBA regular heavyweight title. And that was between Nikolai Valuev and Ruslan Shagayev. And that was 11 inches. That would be the same as Tyson Fury, Mike Tyson. But yeah, that said, I think it's one of those where they are such polar opposite fighters, because one is small, compact, muscular, hard punching. The other is big, tall, lanky, boxer, uses his jab, uses his feet, which you wouldn't think. You think of the big man being the slugger and the small man being the fast boxer, but in this fight, it's completely opposite. It's the bull and the matador, but the matador's enormous and the bull is tiny, but absolutely terrifying.
It is, and it's just the common theme with Mike Tyson, where how to beat him, so to speak, was to survive the early rounds, get out of the first 4 rounds, and then his steam would tend to go down a bit. He's less explosive. He's not as sharp. I mean, he did get late knockouts in his time, but the common, especially as he got out of his prime, the common theme as to how to beat him would be to survive the earlier rounds and then try and drag him down to the deep waters and get him late. But how would you see it between these two? Because obviously, there's a massive size difference. I don't think that would have stopped Iron Mike from kind of steamrolling into Fury. But would Fury have been able to avoid him during those early rounds, or possibly? I mean, how would if you was to construct a game plan for Fury against Mike Tyson, what would you say for him to do?
The only way that you can beat Mike Tyson, in my opinion, is to break his heart. Mike Tyson is a bully. He's always been a bully. He was getting to be a bully. You look back at the bullies of boxing history. You look at the Dempseys, the Listons, the big punching heavyweights. They weren't good when they faced adversity. Okay, so Mike Tyson wasn't good when he faced adversity. When he dropped them and they got back up. If you look at the likes of Evander Holyfield, he hit Evander Holyfield with the kitchen sink, and Evander Holyfield wouldn't go down. Buster Douglas, that uppercut that he knocked down Buster Douglas in the 8th round, nearly took his head off. Yeah. But Tyson didn't like it when people wouldn't be bullied, when people refused to be bullied. And then if we look at Tyson Fury's game, his fights where he's faced adversity, Steve Cunningham, John T. Wilder won. He's got up from horrendous knockdowns and been back better and fought back and showed that he can bully the bully. So it's easier said than done with a guy that hits like Mike Tyson, but you have to break his will. You have to break his heart. You have to take him into those, like you talked about, deep waters, psychologically deep waters of you can't hurt me. If Tyson thinks he can't hurt you, that is when he starts to wane. He loses that edge, because when he comes in, he's one of the scariest fighters of all time. You know, he has that psychological edge of a killer. But if Fury has to be able to take the shots and get up from the deck once, twice, 3 times, he has to be able to do that and know he can do that to beat Mike Tyson. That's the only way you can do it, because Tyson's going to hit you. Tyson's going to hurt you. If we're talking about prime Mike Tyson here, he will hit you, will hurt you. You have to be able to get back up and break him psychologically if you're Tyson Fury in that fight. And
would he be able to do it? Because I'm just thinking, those first, I'd like, it's easy said and done. I mean, it's all good saying like, oh yeah, well, yeah, survive the first 4 rounds and you're all right. It's all easy saying that, but you've actually got to go in there and do it. And like a lot of people were not able to do it. They were not able to survive that onslaught. So I could just imagine Mike Tyson just steamrolling in, and he brings head movement. He's not just a guy who just runs straight forward. He brings angles. He punches in combinations. He moves his head. He had skill as well to go with that. And like there's a big target in front of him in terms of Tyson Fury. It's like he could hit anywhere. It's impossible for Fury to get out of the way and avoid some of the shots that Mike would land. And the question is that would Mike be able to land enough and consistently enough without getting anything thrown back in his face to take Fury out? Because I'm guessing that the common perception here would be a Mike Tyson knockout or either a Fury points or a late stoppage.
I agree, and I think that there is precedent for that as well. If you look at two fights that Tyson had back-to-back against big, tall, great jabbers, great fighters in Tyrell Biggs, Olympic gold medalist, and Larry Holmes. Obviously, we all know how good Larry Holmes is.
Exactly.
Both incredible jabs, especially Holmes. And although Holmes wasn't as fit, Tyrell Biggs was at the top of his game. You know, and those 2 fights back-to-back, they, for the first 2 or 3 rounds, they looked really good against Tyson, you know, keeping him off with the jab, doing exactly what Fury would want to do. But Tyson caught up to them, you know, and he starched the pair of them. Larry Holmes in 5, Biggs in 7, I believe. But yeah, having a good jab is not a guarantee to keep Tyson off. Like you said, he had incredible head movement, incredible footwork, and he could cut an angle better than most people give him credit for. And I think that Mike Tyson would have a distinct advantage, because Fury's jab, because it's got to go so far because of his massive arms and his massive frame, to get under that and come inside and throw all of those horrendous blows, and like you say, big target of Tyson's body, you know, would that change the fight? Would he be able to get to him early? You know, even though Fury's fast, just the size of how long it's going to take a punch to get there and back compared to how long it's going to take a couple of them little hooks from Tyson to get there and back, you know, that has to be an advantage Tyson, especially early as they're finding out the rhythm and the range.
Yeah, and then if you switch it around now, the advantages for Tyson Fury is that he knows that he can fight both ways, as we've seen. We've seen him box on the back foot magnificently. We've seen him take it to a fighter as well. So in terms of how to fight Mike Tyson, I'm guessing he would have to just do everything, like kind of lean on him, kind of just hold him up close when they get up close. Use his jab down, just really be the bigger man and kind of just outman Mike. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what he would have to do. Let me get a prediction out of you, because I know I couldn't get it before. So I'm going to try and get it now. If these two were to square off in their prime, Mike Tyson, just before he faced Buster Douglas, and let's say the Fury that just beat Wilder just now. So Fury as of now. How would you have it? How would you see that fight going? What would your prediction be?
If it's the Tyson just before he fought Buster Douglas, I'll disagree with you. But I'm going to go a couple of years behind and go the Tyson
okay.
Marvis Frazier. Okay.
Yeah.
Just before he beat.
We'll go with your pick. Yeah.
Just before he won the title, when he was at his most ferocious, I'll pick Mike Tyson, but by a split decision. I think it's very tight, because I think Mike Tyson is a bully, and he will bully. He will psychologically wane with a guy like Fury who'll keep getting up. But I think that Tyson would drop him 2, 3 times on a route to a victory, where Fury is winning the majority of the rounds, majority of the time, like you say, leaning on him, jabbing, moving him around, using that, frankly, ridiculous size advantage. But I think that Tyson, when he gets inside that jab and clips him, Fury will drop. And those points differences, those 10-8 rounds, maybe 10-7 rounds, that is what will nick it for him on a scorecard, where in terms of if you measured it on minute by minute, Fury's probably won more minutes in that fight. but Tyson would have the big moments, I think. And I think that Tyson would win on a decision because of those big moments.
I have to agree. I have to sip up. I probably wouldn't say decision. I'd say I'd probably go for Mike. It's hard. It's actually very hard to predict this one. But the reason why I'm going for Mike is the same reasons as you, is in regards to him being able to land. And when he does land, it will hurt Fury. I think he'd put him down a few times. But I could see Fury building up a lead, at least. Maybe have been in front at the time of like a late stoppage for Iron Mike. But it's if someone was to say, look, I could see Fury being able to like stay on his feet and possibly winning, I could see that too. But I'm going to just say I can't see past Iron Mike. So I'm going to say Iron Mike late around 10. But again, it's all speculative, isn't it? So you've got decision, I've got like a late. But it's very close for me. I'm not confident in picking that due to the size and due to what Fury can bring. He's awkward. And it presents some serious, like, I know some of the guys that Tyson thought he was a lot taller than him did present problems in terms of height and reach, but Fury's something different altogether, which makes me not as confident in the pick. But like you said, if I had to put like a gun to my head, I do think that ultimately, I think that just the punches that he does land will wear on Fury eventually.
I agree. You see, Tony Tucker gave Tyson absolute hell, but eventually Tyson got to him beaten.
Yeah. And we're talking about primes here, so we'll just go with that.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next one anyway, man. I think that this one will be easier for you to do because I did get your prediction on it before. And we're going to talk about Floyd Mayweather and Thomas Hearns. Now, a big fan of both fighters. Mayweather, growing up, I remember just using to watch this guy. I think the first Mayweather fight that I saw live was, obviously I saw highlights of the Corrales fight. When I was growing up, I think it was the Jesus Chavez fight at Super Feather, just before he moved up to lightweight, and displayed everything. And just the fact that he's gone up all these weight divisions and been able to, he's been able to dominate. He's been able to pick up titles in each division. At welterweight, he kind of hit his ceiling. I know he went to light middle as well, but welterweight was where he really kind of ended his career. Not a natural welterweight by any means. And against somebody like Thomas Hearns, he's a serious, like he went all the way up to cruiserweight. Thomas Hearns did. So he was a big welterweight, a lot taller, broader, hit like a mule. Is this a bad fight for Floyd?
This is the worst fight for Floyd. There are better welterweights out there. There's the Sugar Ray Robinsons, the Sugar Ray Leonards, even going back to people like Barney Ross and Henry Armstrong. There's great welterweights in the history of boxing, but nobody for me is a worse matchup than Thomas Hearns.
Why'd you say that?
Thomas Hearns scored knockouts at cruiserweight, light heavyweight, super middleweight, junior middleweight, and welterweight. He knocked out men that weighed 200 pounds, 175 pounds, going down that list again. Floyd Mayweather scored 2 knockouts at welterweight, never knocked anyone out at light middleweight, and one of those knockouts was against Ricky Hatton when Ricky Hatton was just gassed, and the other one was the Victor Ortiz one, which, say about what you will, but that was probably not going to happen in the course of the fight had the headbutt not happened. Although Floyd was a supreme technician, nobody's arguing that. He was a fantastic boxer with amazing defense. Everything Floyd didn't like in a fighter, power, reach, strength, fitness, jab, adaptability, Hearns had everything. His jab was absolutely incredible. It's one of the greatest jabs in the history of boxing. It was flicking. It could be a Swiss Army knife. It could be to disguise a punch, or it could be a weapon in itself. And it always had that stinging cobra right hand behind it. And if you look at the shots that hurt Floyd and the people that hurt Floyd, they're all big right hands or big rear left hand from Zab Judah. But the Mosley fight, the Maidana fight, right hands. And if you look at how quick the Hearns right hand was at welterweight, it was faster than those.
Yeah, he was very quick. He had hand speed as well, not just punches hard. He had quick hands.
Quick hands. So for me, in terms of, if you look at the 3 people that hurt Mayweather, Mosley, Zab Judah, Marcus Maidana, Thomas Hearns is faster, stronger, more powerful, and more accurate than every single one of them. And I know they're great fighters and great champions, but Hearns was bigger, faster, more powerful than every single one. He gives Mayweather an absolute nightmare. And it's hard to envisage Mayweather losing because he never did. But you have to when you look at this fight.
Yeah. Is there any way how you could see him winning? I mean, we know he's great defensively. We know that I think that his toughness is underrated. And he does bring a lot to the table skill-wise. He could present problems for Tommy Hearns that way, but it's just the fact that ultimately you're not going to be able to avoid that right all night. And as Mayweather did move up to welter, he did end up getting hit more often than he did as he was a super feather. That's natural because he's putting on extra weight. That's not his natural weight. So it's just a bad stylistic matchup for Floyd, isn't it?
Yeah. The way Floyd Mayweather wins this round is if it's 45 rounds and he's got a bicycle helmet and a baseball bat. That's the only way he wins it. Thomas Hearns was too big, too good. And I just did a bit of statistics. Thomas Hearns, if we're talking about, so say this fight is hypothetically a 12-rounder, okay?
Yeah.
If you cap all of Thomas Hearns' fights at 12 rounds, obviously he got stopped by Sugar Ray Leonard in the 14th round, but he had a massive lead on the scorecards after 12. So if you trim that fight and say he won it at 12 rounds, he won a points decision, Thomas Hearns had a 33-0 record at welterweight with 31 knockouts.
Wow.
And Floyd was 10-0 with 2 knockouts at welterweight. It's just, they're just different class. And Floyd Mayweather might be remembered as a better fighter, maybe. I don't think so, but he might be. He was great. But stylistically at welterweight, it's just everything's wrong. Everything's wrong.
Final prediction?
Hearns KO 5.
5 rounds. I have to agree. I just think that as great as Mayweather was, like you said, he'll likely go down as the better fighter in history. But styles make fights at the end of the day. Not everybody that beats everyone will go down as a better fighter. Some people just had a bad style matchup for them. Look at Ken Norton and Muhammad Ali, for example. And with this, for example, I just look at exactly the same as you. I think that Thomas Hearns would wipe Floyd out at welter, unfortunately for him. But I've got Thomas Hearns probably, around 5-6. I just think that right would land and it would be too much for him. Exactly. And you know what? Before we go, Floyd, when he was at welter, he did take on great competition. There's no denying his CV and how much of a great fighter he was, best of our generation. But when you look at some of the stylistic matchups that he could have taken, somebody like the Vernon Forrests or the Winky Wrights, it wouldn't have produced the sort of money that he was used to getting. But those sort of style matchups, I always thought would give Floyd some problems, but we never really got to see him fight those guys.
Yeah, whereas
that type of style.
Whereas Hearns fought Hagler, Duran, Leonard, Iran the Blade Barkley. He fought every style at every weight. Do you know what I mean? Never shied away from a challenge in a way that Floyd in his later career did. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next one anyway, man. All British Showdown. I definitely want to get your opinion on this one because it's a fantasy matchup that has been mentioned loads of times. Obviously, we never got to see it because when one guy was on the up, the other guy was kind of coming out of his prime. But Amir Khan and Ricky Hatton, how do you see that fight going? Because again, stylistically, both present problems for each other. Amir Khan, when he was on his top form, he was brilliant in terms of his hand speed and his footwork. But we all know what his kryptonite was, which was his chin. Whereas Ricky Hatton was an unbelievable pressure fighter, used to steam forward, but he was open, left himself open to shots. Somebody like Khan could counterpunch him. How do you kind of see that fight? Just weigh it up for me before we go into it.
It's a really, really difficult one because it's speed versus relentlessness, isn't it? It's that boxer, the flicky, the tippy tap sort of style of Amir Khan and his brilliant lateral movement and his fantastic hand speed versus Ricky Hatton, who's one of the toughest people to ever step in a boxing ring, in my opinion. He's as tough as they come. He will take 1 to land, take 3 to land 1, Mexican style, big hooks to the body, 2 of Britain's finest and 2 of the North's finest as well.
Yeah. I remember watching Ricky Hatton fight back in the day against Eamon McGee. And that fight was like huge build up for that one because Eamon McGee was a tough bastard, man. He was just and his whole story in general, he was just a tough guy. But in the ring, he was quite slick. And I remember Hatton steamed forward in the first round and then he went to throw some hooks to the body, got caught with a counter, fell on his ass. Someone like Khan, the thing with Khan is while he could do that, he did tend to get drawn into fights too, which is his big downfall, I think, in this fight, and which is why I'll pick Ricky Hatton to beat Khan, is because Khan, although he's very good in terms of his hand speed and what he can bring stylistically, I don't think he's disciplined enough to do that against Ricky Hatton for the whole fight. And I think Ricky Hatton would drag him to somewhere where he wouldn't want to go, and I think that he'd probably take him out.
I'm inclined to agree, and I love Amir Khan. I've interviewed Amir Khan, and he's the nicest dude, and he's one of the first people that got me into this sport. Watching the Olympics in 2004 is one of my first proper memories of live boxing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I always hesitate to slag off Amir Khan because I really genuinely like him. But I think that for the first 6-7 rounds, it's a washover. It's all calm, one-way traffic. He's sticking and moving, popping Ricky in the face, but I don't think he's got the power to hurt him. And I think that Ricky's body shots are going to take a toll. We saw what literally 2 body shots from Canelo Alvarez did. Canelo Alvarez landed 2 body shots, one on each side, and Khan took that step off, had to slow down because of what the body shots had taken out of him, and then he got that big one over the top. So I think that Ricky Hatton does the same thing on a smaller scale. I think that Ricky Hatton works that body, breaks him down over those rounds. Even in rounds that he loses, he lands, the Chavez-Taylor thing. Taylor was like Khan, slick boxer, not as much power, and Chavez more like Hatton in a way that where he's pressure fighting, big shots to the body. I think that fight goes quite similarly to the Taylor-Chavez fight where, Ricky's on a big points deficit, slows him down with body shots, and then as soon as Amir Khan drops his hands to protect the body, doesn't want another one of them, big one comes over the top, and we see Amir Khan's whiskers get him again. He's a great fighter, but we all know what his weakness is. He's a bit soft around the whiskers, and I don't think you can be soft around the whiskers if you're in there with Ricky Hatton, 140 pound.
No, but then flipping it, Ricky Hatton did tend to cut easily, very easily. He had quite thin skin, didn't he? Amir Khan, how sharp he is, he could land enough punches earlier on to mark Ricky Hatton, cut him up, maybe even force a cut stoppage. Is that out of the realms of possibility?
Again, it's a really good question. But if you've listened to some of the interviews with Kerry Kayes, he's come out recently. He said that in Ricky's up here on his, I'm not sure what you call that, above his eyebrow, basically, in an earlier fight, a doctor had put Vaseline in and then not cleaned it out properly at the end of the fight. So he had crystallized Vaseline in for the period where he was between British title and world title and the first few defenses of his WBU belt. Ricky Hatton basically had glass under his eye, so he would cut under there. So before...
He did cut there a lot, actually.
Yeah, and it was exactly in the one spot, and he would always cut, and they basically had to pull it out with tweezers, this crystallized Vaseline. And so if you watch from the Mayweather fight onwards, I don't think he cuts. They did an operation. They got a plastic surgeon to remove all of this stuff from his eye. So there's a period where he cuts and a period where he doesn't.
Yeah.
So it depends where we're picking Ricky Hatton. And if it's the Costa-Tszyu fight, he might cut, because I'm not sure where he was at that point. But definitely by the Mayweather fight, he'd had that problem fixed. And he didn't get cut against Mayweather, didn't get cut against Pacquiao. He didn't get... I don't think he even got cut against Senchenko, did he? I don't think so. I can't remember.
No, I don't think so. No.
So yeah, it depends where we're picking our prime Ricky Hatton from.
Well, where would you say? I mean, I'd say prime Khan was definitely 140, 100% 140. So yeah, I'd say both of them at 140. I'd say you have to be. Yeah. When Ricky Hatton was a unified champion around them times. Costa-Tszyu fight, yeah, knocked out Carlos Mauser around that time, and then Khan himself, he was a unified champion as well. No, just had one belt, didn't he? He had the WBA at 140. So yeah, around that time. So let's say 140 with them two. Still going Ricky Hatton?
I'm still going Hatton, but yeah, I think the cuts thing is an important talking point.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's move on to the next one anyway. I've got two more before we kind of end this video. So I'm going to take it to another popular fantasy fight, and this is one in the middleweight division, Bernard Hopkins and Triple G. Both of these guys, I think Triple G broke the record, didn't he? Broke Hopkins' record for title defenses, didn't he? Which was obviously set by Bernard Hopkins. Again, Hopkins, the American dream, in prison, learned boxing that way, came up the hard way, didn't have no handouts. Then he fought his way to the middleweight championship of the world, beating Felix Trinidad, went on to set records in his career. And, he was a great champion, made defenses of his belt, and he was rugged, he was tough, and he was skilled. He was just the most disciplined fighter that I can remember. And to go with his skills, he knew how to rough you up. And then as he got older, obviously, he kind of modified his style to go with his age. And that created the longevity for him to last in the sport for as long as he did. And then on the other hand, you got Triple G, who, like I said, he broke Hopkins' middleweight title defense record. He was a ferocious puncher out in there. He had a record, 21 straight knockouts, I think, at middleweight or something like that. So, yeah, Triple G, I think the hype has kind of died down a little bit now, but it's natural because he's out of his prime. But an in-prime Triple G against an in-prime Bernard Hopkins, how do you see that going between them two? So let's say the Hopkins that beat Trinidad, that performance, and then the Triple G, I'd say around maybe around the time of the Lemieux fight, maybe before then, like when he was really in his prime then. I'd say around 2015, maybe 16.
Lemieux Macklin, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's a really hard one. It's really hard because, again, it's this thing of styles versus history, okay? Because Bernard Hopkins, for me, will go down as a better middleweight champion, a more legendary middleweight champion than Gennady Golovkin will, okay? But does Gennady Golovkin have that style to really take the fight to Hopkins and really give him an absolute nightmare, because Hopkins was fantastic. And like against a boxer like Trinidad, he did an absolute number on him. But really, Trinidad was 154-pounder, really. I don't know. There's a lot of great things about Bernard Hopkins, but his attribute is his adaptability in fights. It's how he can see what you're doing, read it, and do something different. He never went in with a game plan as such in terms of, I'm going to do, it's not like where you see people who they have to do X in a fight to win. Like we were talking about Amir Khan. Amir Khan has to avoid a big right hand, pop you with a jab, get on his bike, skim out, do this, do that. Hopkins, if you want to bring it to you, bring it to you. If you wanted to pop you off the back foot and counter punch, you could do that too. But against Gennady Golovkin, he has to counter punch because Golovkin only comes forward. The only people who've done well against Golovkin can counter punch. Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure if Hopkins would carry enough power. He's not got an immense amount of knockouts on his record. And again, we look at some of the guys he did knock out. They were smaller guys. Gennady Golovkin knocked out legit full-blooded middleweights. And although they weren't as good as the ones Hopkins fought, Hopkins didn't knock them out. He would count punch them, move forward, move in, move out, adapt his style. Whereas Golovkin pushed the fight every single time, always on the front foot, always relentless, didn't mind taking them. He's got an iron chin. And he would be right on you, on your chest, pummeling your body, pummeling your head, upstairs, downstairs, the entire fight. I think it's a great fight, and I think it would be very close. Like all Bernard Hopkins' losses were close, but I think it's a very, very close fight. But I think I favour Golovkin.
Favour Golovkin. For me, it's hard for me to pick against Bernard, and the reason why I say that is not because I think he just beats Triple G easily. I don't at all. But my argument for Hopkins is that he somehow found a way to win when we picked against him, like Trinidad, for example, Tarver. I know there was that light heavyweight. He went on to do things that we just didn't expect him to do. And he didn't care how he won. And just part of me just thinks that he would know what Triple G brings in terms of like what he brings to the table in terms of punching power and his technique, because he does have very good technique. Triple G has a great jab and he knows how to apply pressure as well. But for me, it's like he just defends with his face. And like he doesn't have the great defense. He doesn't move his head. Hopkins wouldn't have been able to knock him out for sure. He wouldn't have been able to knock Triple G out. He's got the best chin in boxing today, probably. But I just think Hopkins would have the mind games would have begun from early. Like before the fight started, he would have found a way to get into Triple G's head. Triple G doesn't really seem like the guy that allows too much to get to him. But I just think in the ring, Hopkins would just do all sorts of like fight dirty, like get a couple of low blows in there, here and there. Throw him off his game somehow and maybe labor to like a point win where it's like everybody's booing after because how the fight was. I could see it going that way. Could Triple G knock Hopkins out? Yeah, Hopkins didn't have the greatest chin in the world. He'd been down on the floor before. Definitely not as good a chin as Triple G. But just part of me just thinks Hopkins would just steal a win, like find a way to win, which is what the great fighters do.
I think this fight is razor thin either way. I think Golovkin would impose himself on that game and make the fight his just enough to beat Hopkins. The way Kalzagi stole it just by imposing his game just slightly more than Hopkins was able to get into the fight. Obviously different styles, but I think Hopkins, he was so adaptable and he would fight the fight of his opponent but find a way to win. I think that he might be able to just get drawn out of that fight. But everything you've said is completely right. Because Bernard Hopkins found a way to win in fights that he had no business winning. Antonio Tarver at light heavyweight, no business winning that. Yeah, absolutely none. But he steals that win. And I think that it would be far closer. People might think Triple G steamrolls him or Hopkins gives him a boxing lesson. No, I think it's a razor's edge either way. I think there'll be moments in that where Golovkin gets hit clean 2-3 times in a row, but then there's also ones where Hopkins gets hurt to the body, gets hurt to the head. I think it's one of those back and forths where we'd have a middleweight classic, but it would go down to the wire for whoever might win that one.
Yeah, Hopkins wasn't in many classics in his career, I'll tell you that for now. But Jermaine Taylor, for example, he found a way to win. Even though it was controversial, even though many thought Hopkins won, Taylor found a way to win. He was a big, strong middleweight. He had a good jab on him. Doesn't fight like Triple G, but I mean, he found a way to win. Even when Hopkins was being crafty and using dirty tactics and whatever, like he still found a way. So it's not impossible for Triple G at all. But I think, like you said, it's a very razor thin. I wouldn't really argue too much either way. Again, Hopkins will go down as the better fighter in history, but in terms of stylistically, it's very close to call.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our final one anyway, man. We reached the half an hour mark. We're definitely going to go over it by a little bit, but let's talk about one more fight. Another very difficult one, man. This is Joe Calzaghe and Andre Ward in their primes. Now, both of these guys at super middleweight reign supreme. They both ended up moving up to light heavyweight eventually. Both picked up world titles there. Two great fighters, man. Absolutely great fighters. Both of them retired undefeated. So that's why this makes it even more harder to pick a winner in this one. Calzaghe, brilliant footwork, brilliant hand speed. He went over to America a bit later than I would have liked, in my opinion. That's not necessarily his fault. Andre Ward, on the other hand, I mean, his career was it's kind of stop-start. You know, he had the issues with Goosen and he was out the ring for a while. But then when he came back, he reigned supreme at super middleweight. Then he went up to light heavyweight, defeated Kovalev. So both of them had perfect careers. Weighing up this fight, difficult to call, man. Difficult to call.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I talked about it's hard to envisage Mayweather losing because he never lost. You know, it's hard to envisage either of these guys losing because they never lost. You know, when we look at the other precedents, you know, there's always one loss where you think, oh, well, that guy did it. So how can you follow that blueprint down the line of how to beat them? But these guys, neither of them have a blueprint. You know, nobody came that close. Kovalev, I scored Kovalev winning that fight, but I've no problem with a draw. I've no problem with Ward winning, you know. And ultimately, he won, didn't he? He walked away with Kovalev's belt. So you can't say it was that bad. And then with Kalzagi, that was against Hopkins. That was close. You know, the Roy Jones Jr. one wasn't a definitive. He didn't knock him out, you know. No. But again, you can't find those clear blueprints. There's nobody that set the precedent to beat either of these guys. And they're both masterful, but in their own way. You know, Ward was a master of the defensive style. He had that Philly shell. He would measure. He was a great distance manager. He was a great risk manager. You know, he would never, ever take a risk if he didn't need to. Whereas Calzaghe, it was footwork, hand speed, moving around the ring and imposing his own game plan and his own pace on a fight, a pace that he knew his opponents couldn't match. So, again, it's a really, really hard one. I think it's a really close one as well.
Very close, man. And just as you're saying that, I'm just thinking how the styles would mesh, how they would go in there and fight each other. Ward, wasn't the prettiest, but technically one of the best I've seen. He's brilliantly defensively, but Calzaghe was just, you know, he was quick. He wasn't the best defensively. He did get caught a few times. In his fight with Robin Reed, I know it was very early in his career, a lot of people thought Robin Reed won that. Calzaghe, the punches and bunches, I think, would get to Ward. It would, even if they're not landing, I just think the flurry and the amount that he's throwing and just the speed and the angles that he's bringing would pose Ward some problems. Ward is going to have to, in my opinion, hurt Calzaghe. And Calzaghe's a big guy. He's probably bigger than Ward. So it's a tough one. I don't know who I'm picking in this one yet. I'm going to have to think about it on my feet, but I don't know who I'd have for this fight. It's literally that close.
I'm going to pick Joe, and I'm not sure. It might be because I love Joe Calzaghe, but I think Calzaghe's, like you say, his punches and munches, I think it's going to win this fight, right? Ward's defense, it was like risk management. It was, where can I stand or where can I put my hands where I'm not going to get hit, where I'm not going to get hurt, where I'm not going to get stopped, right? But Joe Calzaghe didn't mind hitting you on the gloves, didn't mind hitting your shoulders, your arms, your elbows, but he'd throw 8 at a time, bang, 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 bang. And then even if he was hitting you, maybe one snuck through, you know. But those big, loud punches with big slapping gloves, those score, and the judges are thinking, as they're writing this down, they're thinking, God, he's throwing a lot more here. And I think the percentages might be quite similar for thrown and landed, but in terms of the actual landed punches even might be quite similar in terms of how many they land. But in terms of how many are thrown by Joe Calzaghe, he's going to out-throw Ward 3, 4, 5 to 1 in this fight. You know, Ward he's not going to open himself up to a guy with his hands as fast as Calzaghe. He's going to think, oh God, I need to be a bit wary here, a bit wary there. Whereas Calzaghe just goes, we've seen it in every fight he's done. You know, he got dropped by Hopkins, dropped by Jones Jr., but it's because he went for those. He thought, you know, I'm going to throw a combination here. I'm going to try and get him. And that's what he did that's what he did in his fights. He went for his guys, whereas Ward is that risk management. Where can I stand? Where can I do this? And I think he's hesitant, doesn't throw enough punches to beat Calzaghe. And as much as it's close, and it might be like the Bernard Hopkins fight, a close fight, you know, because Ward's got impeccable counter punching, great defense. But I think Kalzagi's punches and munches, his speed, his aggressiveness, his willingness to throw more punches. Like I say, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1 to make sure he's throwing more. That's what's going to sway up the judges. Neither guy's going to win a knockout here. They're not big punches.
No.
But I think that output from Kalzagi is going to be the defining factor.
I have to agree. I think Ward was a master at distance, at keeping the distance, and he was a master of like knowing when to be gritty and just knowing how to win. The guy hadn't lost a fight since he was like 13 years old in the amateurs or something like that. So he knew how to find a way to win. Against Kovalev, he faced adversity. He found a way to win. Against Kalzagi, some would say, yeah, he'd find a way to win. But just thinking about it, and prime Kalzagi, in his prime, like you said, the punches and bunches, the skill, the speed, I think that would have thrown Ward off a little bit. I think it could be like a split decision. It could be one of those fights where you argue who you think wins. It could be one of those ones where you're like, what do you prefer? Like, you might prefer the way how Ward punches compared to Kalzagi. You might prefer the output that Kalzagi throws compared to Ward. It's one of those fights for me, but it's like I could see Kalzagi taking a split decision, something like that.
I'm in agreement. I think it's very close, and I think it is that thing. Ward always made a fight close and gritty and hard to score, because even in the ones where I thought he lost against Kovalev, he made it incredibly hard to score because of the way he fights. I think that, like I say, I think that the judges on a night, if the crowd was in, Kalzagi had a famously virulent Welsh crowd, and every time those big punches land, those big pop, 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 pop series go in, even if none of them hit Ward, even if they all land gloves and elbows and things, that starts to get in the mind of the judges. And I think that's how he nicks a split decision or a unanimous decision.
Have to agree. But yeah, listen, man, it's great to have you on, and it's great that we managed to go over these fights. What do you say? I think we should do some more videos like this, probably write some fantasy fights down and just talk them over, because, listen, I had fun today. And I think like some of these fights, we're never going to see them. Like, they're never going to happen. But it's always good to just talk about them, isn't it? So, Ewan, is there anything else from you, like, just so we can get some of the viewers to follow you, let them know where you are on the socials and where they can find you?
Yeah, I think I'm at EB Boxing 0, and Simbox is obviously, I write all my writing and everything's on Simbox. I've got a great Throwback Thursday coming out this week about when a cowboy gunslinger refereed a world heavyweight title fight in 1896.
Look out for that.
So watch out for that.
Definitely look out for that, man. Still loved your article on the Don King piece as well last week. And you know what? Your piece actually made me look for a documentary. I found one as well on Don King because of the write-up that you did. So, yeah, for you guys that don't follow Ewan, make sure you do. Trust me, he's a great account to follow. He knows his stuff. And we're definitely going to get you on for some more fantasy fights, man. So that brings it to the end of this video. And listen, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for tuning in.